Twilight took a step back, recovering from the effects that her memory had on her. The light from the vision faded and left the room once more with the bleeding body of the creature that ate the books. She then shook her head, trying to wrap her mind around what she had just witnessed. Celestia sent that poor mare to her death. Twilight then shook her head again, the thoughts just jumbling together and tried to picture what she didn't want them to form. All she did was read a book, and even that said she was royal to the crown. Twilight then rubbed her head, trying to stop an ache from forming. Celestia must have had a good reason, right? But even said so, but she then bit her bottom lip, remembering how the princess had yelled out at her younger sister. How that she had declared that Luna's crown was basically worthless. The clacking sound of the tile hitting the floor distracted her for a moment, her eyes quickly noticing having one of them landed just before her. It bore the same description as the door, a pony reading the book with Celestia bearing down on them. I shouldn't have think too hard on this now. Twilight swallowed, quickly grabbing the tile and having it vanish into her revisor. I'm getting close to seeing Celestia. I just know it. I can ask her anything I want once I am out of here. I just have to get out of here first. Twilight didn't waste any time getting out of the room, wanting to distance herself from the memory. Princess Celestia was like a second mother to her, a source of wisdom as her guidance, a beacon of light in the world that may not be at its brightest. To break down into something akin to the spot, it wasn't something that Twilight was willing to accept. Celestia had been the type to destroy the lives of other ponies, but that was just because it favored her, or to wantonly accuse a pony of misdeed, nor it had sent anyone to their deaths within just the last 400 years. She wasn't that type of ruler. Maybe she was once. Twilight then stopped before the next door. Next to her, the large double door etched through into the stone, where the two princesses facing away from each other. Luna's eyes were drawn into the glare, while Celestia's was closed, hinting the despair that showed on her face. Over the heads was a silhouette of a small acorn. Those figure appeared to be ascending down into the heavens. I suppose the only way to find out more about this of her memories. Celestia gulped again, pressing her hoof onto the stone. The monsters had been faced was one thing, losing her friends, but it was another. But it was being forced to believe her mentor was not always the wise, loving, gracious ruler that she always had been. It was the most bitter pill of all to swallow. The stone pushed open, grinding against the floor to reveal a small square of the contents of the room. In the center of the room stood yet another familiar monster. A shabbily cloak covered its body with its blade-like legs. Its black was like turned into the seer. The only thing seemed to be noticing her entrance was the light that had hit it, quickly turned and revealing the feeder mask that covered its face. It let out a loud shriek, remembering its body to face intruding the mare. The last time Twilight had fought this creature, it had a bigger dagger and with some books to defend herself. But she was ready now. With the black sword gleamed in the light of her pendant, her instincts had been honed. The creature would not last this time. It raised its sharp forelegs and swung down on them, intent on ending it with a single blow. But in its aim, it was increased. Her eyes naturally saw through the movement. Her body jumped to a side, sharpening the edges, digging into the stone floor where she had been standing. Without letting the creature retaliate, the sword swung open upwards in a flash, slicing straight through the connected joints of its limbs. The creature just let out a horrifying wail as its body crashed into the stone floor under its own weight. It rivered, trying to get upright on its missing front legs. But of course, Twilight's hoof came down hard on where its shoulders would be, pinning it to the floor. The feeder mask looked up, just at the point of the blade slamming down at the center of the creature's forehead. The blade buried itself halfway into the creature's skull before it suddenly stopped thrashing. Twilight panted softly, waiting for a few seconds to ensure that it had stopped moving before withdrawing the blade from its forehead. She turned her head to stare at the blade, seeing her body slowly sliding down with the length of her blade. She flicked the sword carefully, freeing it with as much blood as she could. She then stared at the body of the room. It only took a few seconds before the familiar orb of light popped up once more. Twilight swallowed a little, bracing herself for what might be next. She didn't even know if she was ready to see more of her beloved creatures in this way, but she had a feeling that she wasn't going to have a choice in the matter. The bedroom door slammed open, light infuriating in the dark chamber. The figure darkened Alicorn just stood there, anger visible through the darkness. Thou shalt explain yourself now, dear sister. Luna's voice bellowed through the room, causing the laying figure to stir. Celestia's weary head then turned facing her sister, who had so rudely barged in her room. Within the dark room, it was possible to see the darkened streaks of under her eyes, the signs that she had been crying for some time. We ordered thou to leave us for the day, Celestia growled, not wanting to deal with her sister for now, though the hast we got what we wanted to power for the court. The crown shines here. Why hast who intruder there on us despise our order? The mouth is tarnished with bile, though knows the court like us is jester. Luna then slammed her hoof down on the ground, growling right back at her sister. The royal court has come to a mockery of one of its own fruitful reputation, merely begging and grasping for when their mighty ruler Celestia might grace their presence once more. They care to naught of our invitation ideals, though hast brainwashed them into your ideals, and you ideals alone. They shall not take my crown with the authority, unless they show though for the artist to assure power, and thou knows this. Luna then shook her head, gritted her teeth as she was trying to control her anger before glaring at her sister. So why is thou asked to set up this mockery? There has been no mockery towards thee, sister. Celestia bit back, bringing a hoof up to rub her face for a moment, and tried to regain some of her composure. We need this day off. I thought, though, it would be the best of a happy controlling court of the day. A shallowing thought indeed, though it has to be pent up thy room why you cannot just come to the royal court. If though you truly doesn't care for us, you'd be there to ensure we are not made up into a jester. Celestia was silent for a moment, her eyes gleaming over before looking away from her sister. She didn't say a word for several moments, not helping Luna's growing anger. Well, answer us! Luna slammed her hoof against the ground again, this time causing the bedchamber to shake ever so slightly. Celestia could feel it through her layers of quilted pillows, and knew how serious her sister was. There was no escaping of this unscathed, and although the only thing she could think of now was to tell the truth. Luna, Celestia's voice was finally wavered, closing her eyes to take a deep breath, before finally turning to face her sister. We were with child. Luna's head kicked back in disbelief, unable to process her sister's words. With child? What does that mean? Though he has not shown those signs, or thus has to have had the time, how could you be with child? Her sister did not vast will hear me. Celestia shook her head slowly before closing her eyes solemnly. We are with child until the sun rose over the mountainside. But thou has no child. What those makes little no sense. Luna then shook her head, trying to piece together what her sister was saying. There was this child though who speaks though was no longer has him? Celestia then turned away from her sister, anger starting to swell inside of her. Must relieve our pain already? We are with child, our mood changes and such, but our child no longer lives. First breath of life, he was denied to see the chance of our world under the magnificent light, and know our pleasures and pains, to know the love and dissect. Thus our child was robbed of these joys, before he even began to see life within me. Luna then stood unspeaking, unable to believe in what she was hearing. Her sister had been carrying a new life inside of her, but she had told no one. And then as quickly as it arrived, it had vanished from the world. But as shock began to wear off, several questions began to enter her mind. But sister, though Zas had never mentioned stallion though liked, suitor of yours that has chose not to be shown, nor has chose to be ever shaking or making arrangements for a wedding, or to make a family. Luna shook her head and slammed her hoof. Sister, when did you thus though name to bear a child? Celestia did not respond. Her She faced Luna, quietly staring at her younger sister. She did not speak a word, and her tired eyes were all what needed to be seen. The pieces connected in Luna's mind, and the realization that slowly began to draw on her. The back of her head of her neck began to stand on her end, her muscles tensing as her body reacted as though her mind was fighting. No, the younger sister's words came out quiet, but with the hesitation and the fear was apparent within. Luna, Celestia began, but she was cut off before she could say no more. No, 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 do not. Thou would not stop such a hideous act. Luna's hoof then slammed against the ground again. Her body began to shake as she gritted her teeth. Her brow began to furrow in anger, glaring daggers at the elder alicorn. Though you did not want our mind has conceived, thou would not betray us like that. Luna, please. Luna's eyes twitched. Her hooves violently stomped on the floor again. Her head lowered and her teeth were grinding in her mouth. Her hair twitched violently, surging through the magical energy as betrayal hit her hard. You'll know that we had taken liking to that stallion. Her hoof slammed hard, rocking the bedroom once more, this time leaving cracks upon the floor. But how would you say this anyway, though not only our crown and our power, but our love as well? Her voice began to boom, echoing throughout the halls. Sister, please listen, Celestia begged, trying to stand. It's not what you thinks. Oh, we could clearly see it, sister. Luna's head then rose sharply, her eyes glaring deaf at Celestia. The normal eyes of Luna were glossed over, shining radiant blue, then took over, saying, Betrayal! Thou hast done nothing but betray us. No more. No more we will stand for this. Luna's mane began to rage upward, magic filling the ceilings of the castle. Celestia's eyes widening in realization and began to strike her. But, of course, though, when it had the striker, she looked up. If thou would the tyrant, then we shall be the ones to stop you, to bring you down. No more than our sun plagues our lands out of our lives. You will have seen the last of your days, dearest sister. Till next time we met, it shall be your end. Turning around, Luna walked away, disgusted at the mere sight of her sister. Luna, wait, please, Celestia cried out, trying to follow after her sister. But the doors of her bedroom chamber lit up with darkened magical aurora, slammed shut on her face. Celestia then stared in shock at the realization, slowly dawning at what just happened. She had just turned her sister into her enemy. The only family she had left in the world was now someone had to oppose to fight. Her body shook, tears flowing down her cheeks once more. Her head rose up, and the wailing cry echoed throughout the room. A cold chill ran down Twilight's back as the memory faded away. She stepped back, trying to flee from the memory, only for her backside to run into the stone door that kept her inside the room. Her sword fell into the ground, her magic losing focus at the moment as her mind reeled for the information. Her mentor was going to be a mother once, but she never went full turn. Her father was Merlin, a stallion that Luna had desired, but Celestia had betrayed her sister, knowing full well that Luna had feelings for him, and he was burying his child anyway. Celestia, what were you thinking? Twilight's voice quivered as she spoke out loud, trying to keep herself together. She knew that Celestia could make mistakes, and she knew she wasn't perfect. She always came out right in the end, though. She made the right decisions, right? This happened over 1,000 years ago. She shook her head, trying to calm her thoughts. She's learned a lot since back then. She's just become a violent ruler. She doesn't lie or even cheat or betray. She was never meant back then, earlier. It was just either that way. Twilight swallowed hard, mustering her courage to steady her feet once more. I have to have faith in her. Faith that she truly is the wonderful teacher I always knew for her to be. She turned her eyes to the center of the room as a tile fell into place once more. A gentle crackling let her know it existed. Her eyes quickly looked over at the cover, seeing the dual alicorns with the smaller one in the sky. She hadn't known what it meant at first, and now she couldn't help but wish she hadn't. The tile was quickly placed with the others and their sword once again, Within the grip of her magic, there was one last door that she needed to check out, and likely one more memory she needed to witness. The large doors with Celestia on them had enough space for all 4 of the tiles, and she knew that it would not open without all 4. It did not take her long to get to the final door, in less than 10 places then. She stared at the carvings of the stone. Several unicorns were depicted, and several wearings of the crowns show their royalty. Though thoughts ran through the head and about the carvings and what would mean. So far, each door had been directly related to a memory of Celestia's, and this one was no doubt the same way. But nothing she could think of would fit in the picture that the door that portrayed. It seemed like there was only one way she was going to figure out. She raised her hoof and pushed the door against it open, hearing the familiar grinding of the stone as it opened. She readied her sword as soon as the door was open. Knowing another foe was waiting for her inside the room, her light fell upon the sickly flesh of the creature inside, the squirming beast coming into view. It was the largest one she'd seen, long and slimy, as much the same as a leech. It let out a gurgling groan as it turned towards her, no eyes visible on its head, the only thing agape in her mouth filled with rows of teeth. The last time she had seen the creature, it had been devouring the leftover remains of the ponies, but now she was truly the only pony for it to devour. In its mouth open, it let out a gargled cry, its hefty body slithering towards Twilight with the intent to kill. This time there was no obvious head or neck in the slash, but nowhere for her to know for certain it needed to kill the breath or to think. She would have just had to cut it, make it bleed to death. As the creature lumbered towards her, Twilight quickly moved to her left, letting the burnt of the creature land right where she had been standing. She raised her sword and swung it down, slicing a good chunk of its flesh. It retaliated with a gurgled cry, wiping its fleshy tail back and forth. Its body lumbered and then ran towards the alicorn once more, ready to lash out. Twilight gritted her teeth and concentrated with her magic, ramming the blade straight towards the body of the leech. It then let out a cry and slammed its head down in the direction. Twilight just barely managed to jump out of the hallway in time. She flickered her head back and forth, sending down sword carving across the leech's body. It let out another gargled cry, blood quickly spilling out from the large gash being opened down on the side of its body. Its mouth full of razor-sharp teeth reached forward to try and grab a hold of the purple pony before it. The black sword pulled out from the leech's body pierced through the side of the leech's mouth. It was mere inches from Twilight, rivering in pain, narrowing, having caught the pony with its massive maw. It lifted its head up, gargling into the air with pain. With a snap of her magic, the sword cut through the leech's mouth, splitting it in half. With one final pained gurgle, it smashed to the ground. The rivering stopped, blood poured fiercely from its open wounds, life escaping from the leech. Twilight panted, knowing she narrowly dodged having a limb removed. She flicked the blade in the air, removing the body, but the blood that stained its black edges, so it was clean once more. The strength of the blade had surpassed the blade as she ever seen it in her life. Despite the multiple uses, the consistent staining, it remained sharp, slick, and ready to slice into another foe at the moment's notice. For a moment she had to wonder, what could this possibly blade have been made out of? She shook her head and then looked back towards the center of the room, the ball of light containing Celestia's memory, appearing once more. She swallowed hard, unsure of what she was going to see this time, but she had time to brace herself for whatever it was. "So it's true then?" Celestia asked, facing the confidence of her bedchamber. "I'm afraid so, Your Highness. Half of the royal court seems to have decided which was for best." A rather portly white unicorn spoke, his dark blue mane tied back. He pulled his monocle off of his face and cleaned it with the cloth with his suits before pocketing it, placing it back in his face. "I must have said I've been waiting for this opportunity. The royal court has been a bit, shall we say, contemplatable, while you weren't around." Celestia then paused, her pace and her think over his words, and she just shook her head slightly. before returning to her pacing bags had been started to form under her eyes, a clear sign of stress and exhaustion, and she barely had been able to sleep since Seluna had stormed out of her bedroom that night, and since then she had been amassing a following convincing of people that was right ruler, and even convincing some of the royal court to follow under her command. For someone who cared about having no power under the crown, she was certainly demonstrating what she had a lot of it. In fact, I wouldn't doubt that if there were still supporters of Luna within the royal court, playing a spy for every enemy. The royal chuckled to himself, as if somehow the idea was amusing. Celestia stopped her pacing once again, glaring at the empty space before her. Though such brainwashed words have nary of a hint of dismay, tells us does you believe in these words to be true? Oh, I hardly think of them to be false. I have seen the way their eyes shift, waiting for to be at the weakest. I dare I say, if they aren't the power of any crown themselves. The royal unicorn snorted, as she supposed to chuckle. I would not deal with them if they were in Vi's shoes. Pray thee, Sir Noble, would those though if they had our power? Celestia closed her eyes, concentrating on the words and them alone. Well, I certainly tried to find the villainous scoundrels and put them to the death. She then chuckled and then thought of it, brushing through the hoof against the chin. Such an underhanded methods of trying to attain the crown's power straight towards treason. I can even think of no better punishment than a swift and justify at the end. So though we shall think we kill the members of our court, that we have our head, Celestia's voice held no emotion, just a flat resonance of what the sound was like the monarch. But of course, let us find out those who would stray from the crown and show the V people that the V crown is truly the strongest. No longer shall claim it. The royal let out a laugh, almost as if enjoying every thought of the criminals that would get to their dues. Celestia was then silent, thinking over the wounds of the royal members, just sitting on her chambers. Her mind thought over everything that has happened, and about his words. Slow realization dawned on her, and she turned to face him. Thou speaks the truth. People for our court who wish the power of the crown, though we have survived treacherous plots, attempts in our life, and changes in our land that we face, acquires more than a Jurassic action. She spoke calmly, no longer pacing, but slowly walking towards out the noble. I am glad, though, to have seen reason. Shall we call the guards and undertake the research of treasonable act? The portly ponies are then cut off suddenly, the yellow magic gripping tightly around his neck and lifting him into the air. We shall put death on the ponies who wish to control the power of our crown, starting with thou. Celestia glared her teeth as struggling the unicorn before her. He squirmed and fought of the grip of her magic, gasping for air as the grip seemed to get tightened. Your Highness, the portly pony wheezed, his face growing bluer, and struggled. I would never. Though the ass has been trying to play with us for a fool for some time now, using 5 people lying to our face, living in luxury while the belly grows. They forbid the crown did not go unnoticed, and thou shalt be in the state of on fury. A loud snap was echoed through Celestia's room. As soon as the royal pony's head was now twisted in the wrong direction, with a loud thud, the body hit the floor, released from Celestia's magic. Her cold eyes had stared into the body, unwavering at the fact that the first time she had killed a pony within her own 2 hooves. It was only been the others that have her orders out to death, but now she had blood on their hooves. The same could be said for her soldiers. She then turned towards her chambers and walked towards them, her magic flinging them open. Luna is in the building of army, looking for weaknesses in our kingdom. But if it is a war she's after, then a war shall she get. The bedroom chamber's door slammed shut behind her, leaving behind the body of her first victim within. Twilight shuddered as the world returned to her once more, thankful that memory was over. Her mentor, her second mother, The one pony she looked up to more than anyone else in this world. She had done such a horrible thing. Twilight understood the reason why she did it. The memories made it clear, but she even thought she had gone with it. Her stomach didn't agree with the answer, and her legs then felt weak, even though she had to be strong. She had escaped from this world yet only learned its truth. Whatever it was tied to Celestia, and it was tied directly into what happened with Celestia all those years ago. Twilight needed answers. This darkness was clouding in her head, clouding her entire life now. She needed to have it clear, but she couldn't do that unless Celestia was there to answer. She needed to know the truth, know why Celestia had done all this, and what it was meant, and why it was necessary. Celestia wasn't a tyrant. She was beautiful and kind and loving and serene, and she was the picture of the perfection in Twilight's mind. She would never in her life thought of Celestia as a monster. Even if something would be violent and ruling lover, she wasn't even Celestia to do these horrible, horrible things. Her only consolation was the sound of a tile hitting the ground. It's one of his edges splashing lightly on the leech's blood. Twilight then let out another shudder cry and cleared out her mind, but only walking away towards the tile on the ground. It was carved in the resemble of the door, the same like the others, and it too joined the tiles in a revisor. She had all 4 pieces now, and she could finally open the large doors that halted her in the process. Something deep inside of her, something primal, told her that she'd be waiting for that door, that Celestia herself. She fought that brought through both comfort and fear to the unicorn. Was she all ready to face Celestia now? How could she do that after everything she had seen? But then again, she didn't have much of a choice. She was in a dead end with only one way to go. Even though those giant doors, and she was going to meet Celestia, whatever she was ready or not. In such a way of this world what she was in, pushing her to move when she didn't want to, forcing her to realize that she had seen things that she didn't want to, and lived with those facts. Twilight then took a deep breath and let out another long sigh before walking back to the stone door. The grinding stone echoed once more as she pushed it open and stepped back into the large circular room, the door closing behind her. Only a few small steps that she had found herself into the large stone doors once more. They lowered just above her, and then she stared at them almost in awe. The divine picture of Celestia nailed to a cross that was horrifying, and yet in Twilight's mind, it seemed to have as if to make perfect sense. If any pony was going to get displayed such a cross, then Celestia seemed to be that pony. Her eyes wandered into the 4 holes on the door, waiting for Twilight to place her finds into them. It would only take a moment, and she would hear the doors open, just the way the others had did before. She was moments away from the truth. Twilight froze in place, hearing the sound of the hoof steps once more against stone. She quickly turned around. The sword was ready. She hadn't been expecting anything to be out there. After she had come all the way down to the hallway to get there, there hadn't been any monsters in there. The only monsters that were in there were the doors. No, that was wrong. This world has changed around her as it pleased. It could very well put a monster down in the hallway whenever it felt like it. But this time she was ready. She wasn't about to let herself be killed here, not after everything she had been through. She was going to see this to the end. The hoof steps grew louder, drawing closer. She tightened her grip on the sword and took a calming breath, focusing on the sound. Step by step, louder and louder. If the monster was coming for her, it had done a terrible job of sneaking up on her. She had only been patient and could practically hear it from her now. Her voice, she could count the steps before it became visible to her. 5 steps, 4 steps, 3 steps, 2 steps, 1. The creature stepped into the light of her pendant, stepping fully into view, and for a moment, her Twilight was stunned into silence. "I'm glad I made it here before you went through. I was worried I'm too late." The familiar, cheerful pony spoke up, a severe smile on her face. Her hair had just fallen straight, framing into the side of her face, but there was no mistaking her. "Pinkie Pie?" Twilight gasped in shock, hitting her still. How did you get here? I'm familiar with how this world works, Pinky sighed, a hoof raising up to her hair and ran through the lengths, gently running against the red ribbon that was tied to the end of her hair. I had experienced it twice before, and now for the third time, I have come to the realization what this world wants, and it doesn't want us to go through it together. Pinky's eyes opened in surprise as she was suddenly hugged tight. She hadn't been expecting it, but the comfort giving her friend right there had soothed her worrying mind. The two ponies quickly wrapped each other in their hooves and held tight, not wanting to let the other go. I don't get it, Pinky. I don't, but I'm so glad you're okay. Twilight squeezed a little harder, tears forming in her corner of her eyes. I came up with the others, but I don't know if they're okay or not. They were hurt or possibly even killed right in front of me, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. The tears that had been threatening to burst finally began to fall, landing on Pinky's back. I couldn't save them, Pinky, and I don't know if they're gone or now. Twilight. Pinky then spoke softly, rubbing the unicorn's back in comfort. I really wish I could tell you if they were or not, but there's only one way to know for sure. Huh? How? Twilight then pulled back a little, looking into Pinky's eyes. Pinky then smiled in return, nodding her head slowly. You have to finish this, Twilight, through at that door. You could end all this. Return the world back to normal. You are the only one who could save everyone. But how? Twilight cried out, pressing her head against Pinky's shoulder. I keep hearing those words, that I'm the only one who could save you all, but how? I couldn't save anyone. What am I supposed to do? Twilight, Pinky spoke softly, comforting her friend with a gentle hug. All you've got to do is what you have been doing already. Face the truth the world has to show you, and you accept that it's real. Twilight didn't say a word for a moment after that, just holding into her pink friend. I'm scared too, Twilight quivered, not wanting to see any more of her dearest mentor in that horrible triumph. I know, Twilight, but I assure you, the truth will only be able to set you free. But everyone here, and I know you only can do it. Pinky then stroked Twilight's mane as she began to calm down. Twilight sniffed loudly as she pulled back a few steps, looking at Pinky confused. Why do I have to do it alone? Why couldn't we do this together? Twilight, oh how I wish I could, but you've seen it for yourself, haven't you? Pinky then shook her head slowly. You've only seen what happens when you try to be together here. Twilight bit the bottom of her lip, and she did remember. She remembered what happened to each of her friends in turn. Horrific fates had been befallen on them, and when she had tried to be together with them, this world ripped them apart, and it left Twilight twisted and broken each time. That's why I came to see you now, Twilight. Pinky then smiled. Right before you went through those doors and ended this, I've seen you around a few times, as well as a few other ponies, but I knew I couldn't go see you. It'd be too painful to have us split apart, so I sent you my wishes and waited for when I could see you, and I just got lucky that now this is this time. Twilight then stared at Pinky, grateful but still confused. She swallowed lightly and turned around facing the large twin door that depicted Celestia one last time. She wiped her face of the tears and calmed her nerves. So, I have to go now, don't I? Twilight's lip quivered, but determination was to see through the end was returning. I'm afraid so, Twilight. Pinky then shook her head slowly. As much as I would love to spend more time with you, I'm afraid you have to end this now. But once it's over, I'll throw you all the biggest party you've ever seen. Twilight then swallowed again, nodding her head before walking up to the door. 4 slots, 4 tiles, she whispered to herself. There were no markings on the door that told her which tile needed to go where, so she just hoped by putting them in would do the trick. The 4 tiles appeared around her, hovering over within the grip of her magic. She put them up to the door and then tried to lift at them. The 3rd tile slot entered with a click, while the others didn't. She couldn't remove the 3rd tile. She then realized that she had to put them in the right place so that they would click in place. So it was more guessing now. Quickly trying to each of the slots, each of the tiles fit into the door with a satisfying click, and the door let out a low grinding sound. The room then shook a little. The dust had fallen from the edges of the door, before being split down at the middle, slowly began to open. The grinding noise filled the room as the large doors opened slowly. Twilight stared into the empty abyss while it was behind the doors, unable to see anything and taking shape in there. She gritted her teeth and her muscles tensed. She prayed that there wasn't a monster just lurking around the corner. The doors opened fully and she came to a fully stop. Silence hanging in the air. Her medallion wasn't making any sound. And just look at them meant that for the moment that she would be alright. Alright, she finally spoke, turning around to face Pinkie one last time. I guess this is it then. Good luck, Twilight. Pinkie's words were quiet, but could clearly be heard. I know you can do it. Twilight just gave out a slow, simple nod in return, before turning back to face the door, letting out one last sigh as she began to walk forward, entering the room. The sound of the dark grinding stone was heard behind her. She then turned her head and saw Pinkie for one last moment. She disappeared behind the large stone doors. She was once again in the pitch-black abyss, only to be lit with the sound of her pendant. Twilight then looked forward, not knowing where the room was leading her, but having no choice but to keep going.